The day the Alpha King vanished, every rival pack celebrated. They burned his territory, slaughtered his bloodline, and left hundreds of orphaned wolf pups to die in the wilderness. They believed they had erased his legacy forever. But then something impossible happened. Instead of following the new Alpha Lords, wolves from every corner of the territory began carrying those abandoned pups to one woman. The same woman the entire kingdom had mocked as weak, cursed, and unworthy. One pup arrived, then 10, then hundreds. The enemies laughed, convinced the burden would destroy her. They never imagined that every orphan she accepted was becoming another warrior who would one day fight only for her. And by the time they realized the truth, it was already too late. No one could remember when the forest had last been this quiet. The silence did not belong to peace, it belonged to loss. Only a few nights earlier, the valleys had echoed with the powerful voices of wolves who feared nothing beneath the moon. Their calls had rolled across rivers and mountains like living thunder. Every creature had known that the Alpha King's territory was protected. Every path was watched. Every border was respected. Now the wind carried only the smell of ash. The great dens that had sheltered generations were nothing more than blackened ruins resting beneath a sky covered with smoke. Ancient trees stood scarred by fire. Broken stones marked places where proud warriors had made their final stand. The earth itself looked wounded as though it had tried to protect its people and failed. The Alpha King was gone. Some believed he had fallen in battle. Others whispered that betrayal had claimed him before any enemy ever reached his throne. No one knew the truth. The only thing every creature understood was that the strongest ruler the territory had ever known had disappeared and with him vanished. The order that had held the kingdom together for generations. Power did not remain empty for long. From every direction, rival Alpha Lords crossed the borders. They did not arrive to rebuild. They came to divide what remained. Each claimed a piece of the broken kingdom. Each declared himself the rightful ruler. Each believed strength meant taking from those who could no longer fight. Their warriors hunted every surviving member of the old bloodline. Families that had once stood proudly beneath the Alpha King were scattered before sunrise. Elders vanished into the wilderness. Mothers fled, carrying frightened pups through frozen rivers and dark forests. Many never reached safety. The victors showed no mercy. Mercy had become a forgotten language. One order spread across the territory like poison. No orphan from the old kingdom was to be sheltered. No abandoned pup was to be fed. No survivor was to be allowed to grow into tomorrow. The rival alphas believed they were destroying the future before it could ever rise against them. For a while, it seemed they had succeeded. The forests became filled with frightened cries that no one answered. Small paws wandered through cold rain, searching for parents who would never return. Tiny bodies curled beneath roots and fallen trees, hoping morning would bring someone home. Morning never did. Even the birds stopped singing above those lonely places. Nature itself seemed to mourn. Far beyond the shattered borders stood a small stone cottage surrounded by ancient pines. It had once been visited by warriors seeking wisdom and healers carrying herbs gathered beneath the full moon. Now no one came. The woman who lived there had become a forgotten memory. She had once stood beside the Alpha King. She had once walked through the great halls where every wolf lowered their head in respect. Those days felt like another lifetime. Now she gathered firewood with hands roughened by work instead of royal comfort. She carried water from the stream without servants walking beside her. Her clothes were plain. Her home was quiet. Only memories remained loyal. The neighboring packs spoke of her with pity. Some spoke with laughter. Others called her cursed. They believed she had lost everything worth protecting. None of them looked twice when they passed the lonely path leading toward her home. To them, she was no longer part of history. She was simply what remained after defeat. She never answered their insults. She never defended herself. Pain had taught her that silence often carried greater strength than anger. Still, Still, every evening she stood outside beneath the fading light and looked toward the distant mountains where the royal den once stood. She never admitted what she hoped to see. Perhaps smoke disappearing. Perhaps banners rising again. Perhaps the impossible. Instead, she found only silence. Then one morning something changed. Soft footsteps approached through the mist. Not the heavy stride of a warrior. Not the hurried movement of an enemy scout. These footsteps were careful, almost uncertain. When she opened the wooden gate, she found an old gray wolf standing quietly before her. His fur carried scars from countless winters. His tired eyes never left hers. Between his front paws rested a tiny pup wrapped in dried leaves. The little creature barely breathed. Its ribs showed beneath thin fur. Its eyes remained closed. It was too weak even to cry. The old wolf gently nudged the pup forward. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The woman slowly knelt until her hands rested upon the cold earth. The old wolf lowered his head. Not in fear, in trust. It was a gesture few living creatures had ever witnessed. Without a single sound, he turned and disappeared into the forest. The woman lifted the tiny pup into her arms. Its heartbeat was faint. Its body trembled against her chest. She carried it inside and wrapped it beside the fire. Warm milk touched its lips. Hours passed before the little body finally relaxed. That night, she believed it had been an accident, a lonely survivor found by chance. She was wrong. The following morning, another wolf appeared. This one carried 2 orphaned pups. By sunset, 3 more wolves arrived. The day after that, there were 5. Within a week, the path leading to the little cottage had become something no one could explain. From every corner of the territory, wolves appeared carrying abandoned pups. Some traveled for days. Some crossed enemy lands. Some arrived bleeding from wounds that had not yet healed. None asked for food. None stayed to rest. Each placed another orphan gently before the woman. Each looked into her eyes. Each left without making a sound. It was as though every wolf in the kingdom shared the same unspoken command. Protect them. She never turned away a single one, even when her food became scarce. Even when the cottage grew too small. Even when exhaustion weighed upon every step she took. Each tiny life was welcomed. Each frightened heartbeat found shelter. She did not yet realize what the wolves already understood. The kingdom had lost its alpha king, but perhaps it had not lost its future. Far away inside the halls of the rival alpha lords, laughter echoed against stone walls. Messengers reported the strange stories spreading through the forests. A lonely widow was collecting orphaned pups. The rulers laughed until tears filled their eyes. They believed hunger would destroy her before winter ended. They believed compassion was weakness. They believed she was digging her own grave with every life she accepted. None of them understood that the greatest empires are rarely built by those who seek power first. Sometimes they are built by those who simply refuse to abandon the forgotten. And beyond the dark trees, another wolf had already begun the long journey toward the lonely cottage. Between his jaws rested yet another orphan. The forest no longer looked like a land waiting to die. It looked like a place learning how to breathe again. Morning light slipped through the tall pines and spread across the clearing like warm gold. The air carried the scent of fresh earth and clean rain. Dew rested on every blade of grass. The broken silence that had haunted the valley after the Alpha King disappeared had slowly given way to quiet life. Tiny paws crossed the clearing before the sun reached its highest point. Young wolves chased one another with uncertain steps. Their laughter was soft but real. It was the first sound of hope the forest had heard in many seasons. The woman stood at the edge of the clearing with a woven basket resting against her side. She watched every movement without speaking. Each orphan had arrived carrying fear deep inside its heart. Some had lost parents. Some had lost entire families. Others remembered only fire and blood before waking alone beneath cold skies. Those memories could not be erased. They could only be replaced one gentle day at a time. She had stopped counting how many pups now lived beneath her care. Numbers no longer mattered. Every face carried its own story. Every heartbeat deserved another chance. The little shelters behind the cottage had become a small village. Fresh timber formed strong walls. Thick roofs kept away the rain. Smoke drifted from stone chimneys each evening, and warm light glowed through narrow windows after sunset. Nothing about the place resembled a royal palace, yet it felt stronger than any throne built upon fear. She walked from one shelter to another, carrying bowls filled with warm food. The youngest pups gathered around her. One tiny gray pup reached for her hand before accepting its meal. Another rested its head against her shoulder for only a moment, before running back toward the others. Trust had begun replacing terror. That quiet victory meant more than any crown. Far beyond the clearing, older wolves watched from the shadows. They never crossed into the center unless invited. They hunted through distant valleys. They guarded hidden trails. They circled the borders each night without being asked. The woman understood their silent promise. The forest had accepted her, not because of her name. Not because of the Alpha King she had once loved, because she had protected those no one else wanted. As autumn slowly settled across the mountains, another challenge arrived. The first cold wind swept through the valley before sunrise. Leaves fell from ancient branches and covered the forest floor with gold and crimson. The nights grew longer. Frost appeared beside the river each morning. Winter was no longer a distant thought. It had begun its slow journey toward the valley. Food would soon become scarce. The woman knew it before anyone else. She gathered the older pups together near the largest shelter. They formed a circle around her while the younger ones watched from nearby. Her voice remained calm. "Winter is coming. If we prepare together, no one will go hungry." The older pups looked at one another. Fear flashed across a few young faces. Then one stepped forward. He was taller now than when he first arrived. His once thin body carried quiet strength. "Tell us what to do." She smiled gently. "Today, we begin building our future." From that morning, every day carried purpose. The strongest gathered fallen timber. Others collected berries hidden beneath thick bushes. Some learned to dry meat above slow fires. Others filled woven baskets with healing herbs that would remain useful long after snow covered the mountains. The work transformed the clearing. Every sunrise revealed something new. Fresh storage houses appeared beside the shelters. Wooden fences surrounded the village. Stone paths replaced muddy ground. The frightened children who had once hidden from every sound now moved with confidence through their growing home. The woman watched their change with quiet pride. She never ruled through commands, she taught by example. Whenever heavy logs needed lifting, she worked beside them. Whenever food was prepared, she served the smallest first. Whenever someone stumbled, she helped them stand instead of carrying them. Without realizing it, the pups copied everything she did. Kindness spread faster than fear ever had. One afternoon, a wounded wolf staggered into the clearing. Its white coat was stained with dried blood. Deep claw marks covered one shoulder. The older pups rushed toward the stranger before stopping a few steps away. The woman approached slowly. The wolf lowered its head. Its breathing was weak. It had traveled far. She cleaned the wounds with warm water and crushed herbs while the children watched every careful movement. Hours passed before the exhausted traveler finally rested. When night covered the valley, the wolf opened its eyes. It looked directly at the woman. The northern packs are hunting every survivor of the old kingdom. Its voice was barely louder than the wind. They believe none escaped. She remained silent. The wolf continued. "They do not know this place exists. But rumors have begun to spread. Travelers speak of a hidden sanctuary. Hunters have started asking questions." The clearing fell completely still. Even the younger pups sensed the change. For the first time, danger no longer felt distant. It was moving closer. The wounded wolf remained only until sunrise. Before leaving, it placed a weathered leather pouch into her hands. Inside rested a small carved pendant shaped like a wolf beneath a full moon. She recognized it immediately. It had belonged to the Alpha King. For a long moment, she simply stared at it. The memories returned like waves, his steady voice, his fearless heart, the promise they had once shared. Tears gathered in her eyes but never fell. She closed her fingers around the pendant. His legacy had not disappeared. It had simply changed its path. The older pups noticed the strength returning to her face. Something inside her had awakened. Not grief. Purpose. That evening, she climbed the highest hill overlooking the valley. Below her, the tiny village glowed beneath hundreds of warm lights. Children laughed around cooking fires. Young wolves carried baskets between shelters. Older guardians patrolled the forest edge without being asked. The place that enemies imagined as a burden had become a living family. She looked toward the dark mountains where rival alpha lords ruled through fear. For the first time, she no longer felt alone. She understood what the wolves had seen before she did. This was never meant to be a refuge. It was the beginning of something far greater. As night settled over the valley, a distant howl echoed across the mountains. Another answered, then another. The calls spread farther than she could see. They were not cries of mourning. They were messages. Somewhere beyond the horizon, wolves were moving once again, and this time they were not carrying orphaned pups. They were coming to find the woman who had given the future a place to live. The first snow arrived before dawn. It settled gently across the rooftops and rested upon the branches like pale silk. The valley looked untouched, peaceful from a distance. Yet everyone inside the sanctuary understood that winter tested every promise made during the warmer months. The children woke to a world covered in white. Their excited footsteps marked fresh trails across the clearing before the morning sun climbed above the mountains. Laughter echoed between the cabins. Some of the youngest had never seen snow before. They reached toward the falling flakes as though trying to catch tiny stars drifting from the sky. She watched them from the doorway with quiet gratitude. Only months ago, those same little faces had carried nothing except fear. Now they smiled without looking over their shoulders. They slept through the night. They believed tomorrow would come. That belief had become her greatest responsibility. Every storehouse stood filled with carefully prepared food. Firewood rested beneath covered shelters. The older pups had worked, harder than anyone their age should ever have needed to work. They had earned every warm meal waiting inside. No one complained. No one asked why they had to prepare while other packs celebrated. They understood. Survival belonged to those who planned before danger arrived. As the days passed, the sanctuary settled into a steady rhythm. Morning began with shared work. Afternoon belonged to learning. Evening ended beside warm fires where the youngest listened to stories about courage and loyalty rather than revenge. She never spoke of hatred. She spoke of responsibility. One afternoon, she gathered the oldest pups beneath the towering pine that overlooked the valley. The wind carried snow across the hillside while they formed a quiet circle around her. She looked into every face before speaking. Strength is never measured by how many fear you. It is measured by how many feel safe because you are near. The words settled deep inside them. None answered immediately. At last, one young wolf lifted his head. Then we will become strong enough to protect everyone. A gentle smile crossed her face. That is exactly why we train. From that day, their lessons changed. They learned to move silently through deep snow. They learned to read tracks before the wind erased them. They learned patience. They learned discipline. Most important of all, they learned to trust one another without question. No one competed for glory. Every victory belonged to the whole family. Weeks passed. The sanctuary continued to grow stronger, while the outside world remained blind to what was taking shape inside the forest. Far beyond the mountains, the rival alpha lords grew restless. Reports arrived from hunters. Supply routes through the Old Kingdom had become strangely quiet. Predators avoided certain valleys. Travelers claimed unseen wolves watched them from the trees before disappearing without leaving a trace. The rulers dismissed most of the stories. Still, one alpha remained silent throughout the meeting. Unlike the others, he listened carefully. He understood that forests rarely changed without reason. When the council ended, he summoned his most trusted scout. Find the source of these rumors. Leave no path unexplored. The scout bowed before vanishing into the winter night. Back within the sanctuary, another unexpected visitor appeared. This time it was not a lone wolf. 3 elderly wolves emerged together from the forest. Their coats were silver with age, their movements were slow but steady. Every guardian standing near the entrance lowered its head in respect. The woman stepped forward. The oldest among them carried a weathered bundle wrapped in thick leather. He placed it gently at her feet. Inside rested an ancient map drawn upon softened hide. The markings showed forgotten trails hidden beneath mountains and rivers, places where generations of wolves had once gathered long before kingdoms existed. The old wolf met her eyes. These paths belong to those who protect the future. They have waited for the rightful guardian. She looked down at the map. Every line represented possibility. Every forgotten trail offered safety for those under her care. She understood that this was not simply a gift. It was trust passed from one generation to the next. That evening, she climbed the highest ridge overlooking the sanctuary. Snowflakes drifted quietly around her. Below, she saw warm lights shining through every cabin window. Children carried water. Older wolves repaired fences buried beneath snow. Guardians moved along the forest edge with calm confidence. No one acted from fear anymore. They acted from purpose. She closed her hand around the pendant that had belonged to the Alpha King. For the first time since his disappearance, the pain inside her heart no longer felt like an open wound. It had become determination. She raised her eyes toward the endless wilderness stretching beyond the mountains. Somewhere beyond those frozen peaks, enemies still believed they had erased his legacy. They believed the Old Kingdom had ended. They believed mercy had buried the last hope of resistance. They could not see what the forest already knew. A kingdom was not built by stone walls. It was built by the lives willing to stand together. Far away, a lone figure paused at the edge of the ancient woods. The scout sent by the rival, Alpha Lord, knelt beside a fresh line of tracks pressed into the snow. They were not the tracks of frightened survivors. They were organized, disciplined, countless. He slowly lifted his head toward the distant valley where a faint ribbon of smoke curled into the winter sky. Without realizing it, he had found the first sign that the forgotten sanctuary truly existed. And with that single discovery, the long season of hiding quietly came to an end. Winter slowly loosened its grip on the valley. The heavy snow melted into clear streams that raced between smooth stones. Fresh green leaves covered branches that had stood bare for months. Wildflowers pushed through the damp earth as though the forest itself had decided that sorrow had lasted long enough. The sanctuary awakened with the new season. The frightened pups who had once struggled to stand now crossed the clearing with steady confidence. Their shoulders had grown broader. Their eyes no longer searched every shadow for danger. They carried baskets filled with herbs from the hills. They repaired fences without being asked. They worked beside one another with quiet pride because this place was no longer a shelter. It was home. The woman watched them from the hill overlooking the valley. Every sunrise reminded her how much had changed, not because fate had been kind, because every difficult day had been answered with another choice to keep going. She carried the old pendant of the Alpha King beneath her cloak. She touched it only when no one watched, not to remember what she had lost, to remember what still depended on her. As the morning mist drifted away, the older wolves gathered in the open clearing. The children followed. No one had called them together. They simply understood something important was about to begin. She stepped forward and looked across every familiar face. Some had arrived hungry, some had arrived wounded, some had arrived carrying memories too painful for any child to bear. Now they stood together like a single family. Today we stop surviving. Today we begin preparing for tomorrow. The words settled over the gathering like morning light. No cheers followed, only determined faces. Training began before the sun reached its highest point. The younger pups learned balance. By crossing fallen logs stretched above shallow streams, they stumbled, they laughed, they stood again. The older ones climbed rocky cliffs that overlooked the valley. Their muscles trembled beneath the effort, yet none asked to stop. The strongest wolves moved among them without harshness. They corrected mistakes with patience. Every lesson carried the same purpose. Protect before you conquer. Stand together before you stand alone. Strength without loyalty becomes fear. The woman watched every lesson. Whenever someone failed, she walked beside them instead of ahead. Whenever someone succeeded, she reminded them that pride without kindness soon becomes weakness. Days passed like flowing water. The sanctuary became faster, stronger, more disciplined. Morning belonged to work, afternoon belonged to training, evening belonged to learning. Stories of the old kingdom filled the nights. Not stories about battles. Stories about honor, about promises, about leaders who placed others before themselves. The children listened with quiet hearts. They were not being taught how to become warriors. They were being taught why warriors existed. Far beyond the valley, another story was unfolding. The scout who had discovered the hidden tracks returned to his alpha lord. His clothes carried the scent of pine and mountain rain. His face showed none of the confidence he had possessed before leaving. The alpha watched him carefully. "You found something." The scout lowered his head. "I found more than something. There is a settlement hidden deep within the old forest. It is protected, organized, alive." The hall fell silent. The alpha leaned forward. "How many?" "I could not count them all." "Children. Young wolves. Guardians. More arrive every week." The alpha frowned. "Who leads them?" The scout answered without hesitation. "The widow of the Alpha King." Laughter spread across the chamber. Several commanders shook their heads. One struck the wooden table with his fist. "A grieving widow cannot threaten us. She hides behind children. She hides behind memories." The alpha remained silent. Unlike the others, he did not laugh. He had ruled long enough to recognize danger before it reached his gates. People who survive impossible losses rarely remain weak forever. "Watch them. Do not attack. Not yet." The commanders exchanged uncertain glances. The order surprised them. Back inside the sanctuary, another challenge arrived. A young wolf rushed through the entrance before sunset. His breathing came fast. His fur carried dust from many miles of travel. He bowed before the woman. "Travelers have disappeared near the eastern ridge." The older guardians immediately looked toward the distant mountains. No fear appeared on the woman's face. Only calm thought. She gathered a small group before darkness covered the valley. Not warriors seeking battle, protectors seeking answers. They crossed narrow forest paths beneath tall pines. The deeper they traveled, the quieter the world became. Even the birds had abandoned those woods. Fresh tracks marked the soft ground. Human footprints. Heavy boots, several of them. The woman knelt beside the trail. She studied every mark with patient eyes. Someone had entered the old kingdom without understanding its rules. Hours later, they found the missing travelers, a merchant family huddled beneath broken wagons trapped between fallen trees. Two frightened children clung to their mother while the father struggled to free a wounded horse. Relief filled their faces when the wolves appeared. Fear followed a heartbeat later. The woman stepped forward alone. "You are safe." The merchant looked around at the silent wolves. His hands trembled. "We thought we would die here. Not today." The guardians lifted the fallen timber. Others treated the injured horse. Food and fresh water were shared without question. The merchant watched every act in disbelief. "We were told monsters ruled these forests." The woman looked toward the towering trees. "Monsters do exist, but they are not always the ones people fear." The family left before sunrise, carrying enough supplies to reach the nearest village. Before leaving, the merchant turned once more. "People should know what truly lives here." She smiled softly. Truth always finds its own path. Several days later, stories began spreading across distant villages. Travelers spoke of wolves who rescued strangers instead of hunting them. They spoke of a hidden valley where hungry children were fed before leaders ate. Many dismissed the stories. Others listened carefully. Hope has a strange way of traveling farther than fear. One evening, the oldest guardian approached the woman as the sun disappeared behind the western peaks. He looked toward the busy sanctuary below. "They are becoming strong." She nodded. "Yes." He remained silent for a long moment. Strength attracts enemies. Her eyes rested upon the children laughing near the training field. "I know." The old wolf lifted his head toward the dark forest. "They are already watching." The wind shifted. Far beyond the trees, a pair of unseen eyes reflected the fading light. The rival Alpha's scout had returned. This time he had not come alone. The night carried an uneasy silence. No wind moved through the towering pines. No owl called from the distant hills. Even the river seemed to slow its endless song as darkness settled across the valley. Every guardian felt it. The forest was listening. The woman stood beside the watchtower built from rough timber and stone. Her eyes searched the endless line of trees stretching toward the eastern ridge. Nothing moved, yet every instinct whispered that unseen eyes had already found the sanctuary. She did not speak her fear. Fear spread quickly. Responsibility spread farther. At first light, she gathered the oldest young wolves in the center of the clearing. They formed a wide circle beneath the ancient oak that had become the heart of their home. The children who once arrived weak and broken now stood with steady shoulders and clear eyes. Time had transformed them. Hardship had refined them. She looked at each face before speaking. "The forest has protected us. Now we must learn to protect the forest." No one questioned her words. Every lesson that followed carried greater weight than anything they had learned before. They practiced moving through the trees without breaking a single branch. They learned how to disappear into shadows instead of charging toward danger. They studied the sounds of birds and flowing water until they could recognize when something felt wrong. Patience became their greatest weapon. Awareness became their greatest shield. The sanctuary no longer resembled a village hidden by chance. It had become a living family prepared for whatever tomorrow carried. The younger pups watched the older ones with admiration shining in their eyes. They copied every movement they could, every quiet step, every careful decision. The woman noticed it all. Leadership was growing before her eyes, not through commands, through example. One afternoon, a pair of ravens circled above the valley before landing near the outer watch post. Their sharp cries echoed through the trees. The old guardian raised his head immediately. "Visitors." The word spread quickly but without panic. 2 weary wolves emerged from the western trail. Their fur carried dust from many days of travel. Fresh scratches covered their legs. Exhaustion rested in every step. They stopped before the woman and lowered their heads. "We came from the western valleys." She waited. The first wolf drew a slow breath. "The rival alphas are searching every abandoned settlement." The second continued. "They believe someone is rebuilding the old kingdom, Silence settled across the clearing. The older young wolves exchanged quiet glances. The woman remained calm. How close are they? Closer than yesterday, farther than tomorrow. The answer lingered in the air long after the travelers finished speaking. That evening, no fires burned outside the shelters. The valley rested beneath darkness alone. Every family shared meals indoors while guardians quietly strengthened the outer defenses. Hidden paths were covered with branches. Watchposts rose among the tallest pines. Narrow trails leading toward the sanctuary disappeared beneath careful hands. No one complained. Every task was completed with silent purpose. As midnight approached, the woman walked alone to the edge of the northern ridge. Below her stretched endless forest, touched only by pale moonlight. She remembered standing beside the Alpha King years before. He had once told her that kingdoms were never protected by walls. They survived because ordinary hearts refused to surrender. At the time, she had smiled without fully understanding. Now those words lived inside her. A soft sound drifted through the darkness. Footsteps. The old guardian approached quietly. "You should rest." She looked toward the valley. "How can I rest while they sleep because they trust me?" The old wolf stood beside her. "That is exactly why you must." Even the strongest tree bends when storms refuse to end. She closed her eyes for only a moment. When she opened them, the determination had returned. Tomorrow we begin preparing them for something greater. Morning arrived beneath clear skies. Training changed once again. This time, the older young wolves worked beside the youngest. They became teachers instead of students. One patiently showed a frightened pup how to cross a narrow stream without slipping. Another taught careful breathing before climbing rocky slopes. A young female wolf comforted a child who still feared loud sounds carried by the wind. The woman watched quietly. She smiled. The future was no longer resting on her shoulders alone. It was spreading through every life she had protected. As days passed, the sanctuary grew stronger in ways no enemy could measure. The gardens flourished. The storehouses remained full. Children laughed freely across the open fields. Songs returned to the valley during evening meals. The forest itself seemed brighter. Yet beyond the mountains, darkness continued gathering. Inside, the rival Alpha's fortress, the Scout spread a rough map across a heavy table. Every trail had been marked, every stream, every hill surrounding the hidden sanctuary. The Alpha studied the map without speaking. His commanders urged immediate attack. Burn the village before it grows larger. Destroy the children now. Leave nothing behind. The Alpha slowly shook his head. "You still do not understand." The room fell silent. He looked toward the dark window overlooking his lands. Children do not build watchtowers. Children do not hide supply routes. Someone has taught them patience. Someone has taught them discipline. That makes them dangerous. One commander frowned. "Then what do we do?" The Alpha answered quietly. "We find their weakness. If none exists, we create one." Far away, the woman sensed nothing of that conversation. She stood beside the river where clear water flowed over smooth stones. Several young wolves practiced crossing the current without disturbing its surface. One slipped, another reached out before the fall. Neither laughed. They simply continued together. The woman nodded with quiet pride. Strength shared was strength multiplied. As the sun dipped below the mountains, a young lookout sprinted toward the clearing. His breathing came fast. His voice carried urgency. Fresh tracks, many of them, not wolves. Men. The valley became still. Every guardian lifted their head. The children looked toward the woman. She did not raise her voice. She did not show fear. She simply looked toward the darkening forest where shadows stretched between ancient trees. The time for hiding was ending. The time for standing together had finally arrived. Beyond the last line of pines, dozens of silent figures waited beneath the fading light. None stepped forward. Not yet. But for the first time since the Alpha King had fallen, the enemy had reached the gates of the future he believed he had destroyed. Dawn never truly arrived that morning. A blanket of gray clouds covered the sky and turned the valley into a world of fading shadows. Cold mist drifted between the ancient pines while every guardian stood silently along the hidden borders of the sanctuary. No voices echoed through the clearing. No laughter rose from the younger pups. Even the children understood that something had changed during the night. The woman stood beneath the old oak where the sanctuary had first begun to take shape. Her eyes rested upon every young wolf gathered before her. Months ago, they had looked to her for protection alone. Today, they looked to her for courage. She gave them both. No one will leave this valley in fear. The words were calm, simple, certain. The older wolves bowed their heads. The young guardians straightened their shoulders. No one spoke again. The forest itself seemed to answer her promise. Hidden among the trees, watchful eyes followed every narrow trail leading toward the sanctuary. Young wolves climbed silent platforms built high among the branches. Others disappeared beneath thick ferns where carefully covered paths wound through the undergrowth. Every position had been prepared long before danger arrived. Nothing had been built for war. Everything had been built to protect life. Beyond the eastern ridge, the rival force finally revealed itself. Dark figures emerged one after another between the towering pines. Their banners carried the marks of several alpha lords who had set aside their pride for a single purpose. They believed they had come to crush a forgotten widow before her dream could become reality. Instead, they found a forest that refused to welcome them. Every step forward became slower. Every trail twisted unexpectedly. Fallen trees blocked familiar routes. Streams that appeared shallow suddenly became deep enough to halt heavy wagons. Hours passed. The army advanced only a short distance. Frustration spread through their ranks. One commander struck a nearby tree with his fist. "This cursed forest fights us." An older scout shook his head. No, someone prepared it. Far above them, unseen guardians watched without moving. The woman had forbidden unnecessary violence. No one attacked. No one revealed their position. Patience remained stronger than anger. Back, inside the sanctuary, daily life continued despite the growing danger. The younger children gathered food beside the gardens. The oldest among them carried supplies toward hidden storage caves carved into the hillside months before. Every lesson they had practiced through winter now unfolded naturally. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing descended into panic. Preparation had quietly defeated fear before the enemy ever arrived. The woman walked through the village, greeting every child she passed. A little gray pup reached for her hand. "Will they find us?" She knelt until their eyes met. "Only if we forget who we are." The child frowned. "Who are we?" She smiled gently. "We are the ones who never abandon each other." The little pup nodded with quiet determination. "Then they will never defeat us." She rested her hand softly upon the child's shoulder before standing once more. Those simple words stayed with her as she continued walking. Hope had become stronger than memory. Near sunset, the old silver guardian approached from the northern trail. His expression carried unusual weight. "Scouts from the western hills have returned." She followed him toward the council shelter where several experienced wolves waited. Fresh maps covered the wooden table. Small stones marked the movement of enemy forces. They are spreading wider every hour. One guardian pointed toward the southern valley. Another group crossed the river before sunrise. A third patrol searches the northern cliffs. The woman studied every path without speaking. "They are surrounding us." The old guardian nodded. Slowly, carefully. They believe time is on their side. She looked toward the entrance where warm light from the sanctuary reached across the ground. "Then they still do not understand us." The guardians waited. She placed one finger upon a forgotten trail marked near the western ridge. "Open this passage tonight." The old guardian looked surprised. That trail leads away from the sanctuary. Exactly. Let them discover it. Understanding slowly appeared across every face inside the shelter. The enemy expected frightened survivors hiding behind walls. Instead, they would find abandoned paths leading nowhere. False camps, cold fire pits, empty shelters built only to deceive. By sunrise, dozens of carefully prepared signs pointed away from the true sanctuary. When the rival scouts discovered them, excitement spread through their ranks. They believed they had uncovered secret escape routes. Entire companies changed direction. Precious time disappeared. The forest quietly swallowed their confidence. While the enemy chased shadows, the real sanctuary continued growing stronger. Days passed. Food stores increased. Training continued. The youngest children learned songs their parents had never lived long enough to teach them. Older guardians strengthened hidden bridges across mountain streams. The village no longer waited for disaster. It prepared for tomorrow. Far inside the rival camp, frustration had become anger. The Alpha Lords studied report after report: empty camps, false trails, vanished tracks, invisible defenders. Nothing made sense. One commander slammed both hands upon the table. They mock us. The Alpha remained calm. No, they are making us impatient. That is far more dangerous. For the first time, uncertainty appeared across the faces of the assembled leaders. They had conquered kingdoms through overwhelming force. They had never faced an enemy who refused to fight by their rules. Late that evening, the woman climbed the highest ridge above the sanctuary. Below her, warm lights shimmered between the trees. Children shared meals. Guardians laughed quietly around distant fires. Life continued, not because danger had disappeared, because hope had learned how to survive beside it. The old silver wolf joined her beneath the fading sky. You have changed them. She looked toward the village. No, they changed themselves. I only reminded them what they already carried inside. The old guardian smiled. The Alpha King once believed strength alone could protect a kingdom. She remained silent. He would have been proud to see this. A gentle breeze moved through the valley. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to believe those words. Then the wind changed. It carried a distant sound. Not birds, not wolves. A hunting horn echoed across the mountains. A second answered. Then, a third. The rival coalition had stopped searching. They had chosen a single direction. They were finally marching toward the true heart of the sanctuary. The sound of the hunting horns rolled across the mountains like distant thunder. It echoed through every valley before fading into the endless forest. No child asked what it meant. No guardian needed an explanation. The enemy had stopped searching through shadows. They believed they had finally found the heart of the sanctuary. The woman stood at the entrance to the clearing as the first light of dawn reached the highest peaks. She looked across the valley that had become home to so many forgotten lives. Fresh smoke rose from the kitchens. Young wolves carried water from the river. The smallest children gathered flowers beside the paths they had built with their own hands. Everything before her existed because someone had refused to surrender. She drew a slow breath. Today would test every lesson they had learned. The older guardians gathered beneath the ancient oak. They formed a silent circle around her. Their faces carried neither fear nor pride. Only steady purpose. The old silver wolf stepped forward. The Eastern Watch has confirmed their advance. How many? Enough to believe numbers alone will win. A quiet smile touched her face. Then they still have not learned the first law of this forest. The old guardian nodded. They believe strength walks in straight lines. She looked toward the towering trees. The forest never does. Within moments, every guardian moved into position. Hidden paths opened beneath thick branches. Supplies disappeared into protected caverns. Families followed prepared routes leading toward natural shelters carved into the hillsides months before. Nothing looked hurried. Every movement carried quiet confidence. Preparation had become instinct. The youngest pups watched the older ones instead of giving in to fear. They copied every calm expression they saw, every steady step, every patient breath. The woman noticed it all. Courage had become something they shared. Far beyond the valley, the rival force continued its march. Heavy boots crushed fallen leaves beneath their weight. Spears caught the morning light as long columns pushed deeper into the forest. Commanders pointed toward distant smoke rising above the trees. There. That must be the place. The Alpha Lord raised one hand. No one attacks until I give the order. His commanders looked surprised. He had begun to respect the unseen mind standing against him. He would not make another careless mistake. The army moved forward slowly. With every step, the forest grew quieter. Birds vanished. Small animals disappeared beneath thick roots. Even the wind seemed to avoid the ancient trees. One young soldier whispered to another, "It feels like the forest is watching us." The older warrior answered without looking away from the trail, "Perhaps it is." Hours passed before the first scouts reached the outer edge of the sanctuary. What they found left them confused. Children were planting young trees. Several wolves repaired wooden fences. Others carried baskets filled with herbs and fresh bread. No one reached for a weapon. No one fled. The entire valley looked like a peaceful village instead of a hidden fortress. The scouts hurried back toward their commander. There are no soldiers waiting, only families. The Alpha Lord narrowed his eyes. No kingdom survives this long without defenders. He studied the valley from the cover of thick pines. Then he saw them. High above the clearing, young guardians stood quietly among the branches. They did not threaten. They simply watched. Their discipline unsettled him more than open aggression ever could. These were not frightened survivors. These were protectors. He stepped into the clearing alone. The woman walked forward to meet him. Neither lowered their gaze. For a long moment, the valley stood completely silent. The Alpha Lord looked around at the children working beside the older wolves. "This is what you have been hiding," she answered calmly. "No. This is what you failed to destroy." His eyes hardened. "You have gathered the last blood of the old kingdom. I gathered those your armies abandoned." He slowly turned toward the children. "You believe they can become strong enough to challenge rulers." She followed his gaze. "They already have. Not because they seek power, because they know what it means to protect someone weaker than themselves." The Alpha Lord remained silent. He had expected anger. He had expected hatred. Instead, he found unshakable certainty. Behind the woman, every young guardian stood without moving. None reached for violence. None allowed fear to control them. The valley itself seemed united by one steady heartbeat. The Alpha Lord understood something that chilled him more deeply than winter ever had. Armies could conquer castles. They could not easily conquer loyalty. He looked once more across the sanctuary. Children smiled without fear. Guardians stood shoulder to shoulder. Older wolves watched with calm confidence. Every life in the valley trusted the woman completely. That kind of trust could not be stolen. It had to be earned. He slowly stepped backward. His commanders stared in disbelief. "Why are we not attacking?" The Alpha answered quietly. "Because victory purchased with innocent blood becomes defeat before the next sunrise." Several commanders protested. "If we leave, they will only become stronger." He nodded. "They already have." The army withdrew before sunset. No battle had been fought. No sword had been raised. Yet every soldier carried home the same unsettling truth. The forgotten widow no longer ruled through memory. She ruled through unwavering loyalty. News spread faster than any messenger could travel. Villages whispered about the hidden sanctuary. Hunters spoke of children who feared nothing because they trusted the one who protected them. Even wolves from distant territories began changing their paths. Some arrived with supplies, Others came offering their strength. Many simply wished to stand beneath the same banner of hope. The sanctuary welcomed them all. As evening settled across the valley, the woman climbed the highest ridge once more. Golden light covered the forest in quiet beauty. Below her, the sanctuary had grown beyond anything she once imagined. It was no longer a refuge hidden from the world. It had become a living symbol that compassion could outlast cruelty. The old silver wolf joined her. They came to destroy us. Instead, they left carrying our story. She watched the distant mountains where the rival army disappeared into the fading light. Stories travel farther than armies. The old guardian smiled. And they never march alone. Far beyond the horizon, another Alpha Lord received word that the coalition had returned without victory. He listened in silence. Then he unfolded an ancient map of the entire territory. His finger rested upon the valley where the sanctuary stood. A slow smile crossed his face. Unlike the others, he did not underestimate the woman. He saw something far more dangerous. Not a survivor, not a queen. The beginning of a kingdom that could unite every forgotten pack beneath a single purpose. The valley welcomed spring with a quiet kind of strength. Fresh green covered every hillside where ash had once settled after the fall of the old kingdom. Rivers flowed clear beneath the morning sun. Young trees stood where burned forests had once reached toward empty skies. Life had returned without asking permission from those who believed they had conquered it. The sanctuary had changed beyond recognition. The tiny cottages that once struggled to shelter frightened pups had become a thriving settlement built with careful hands and patient hearts. New homes stood beside wide gathering paths. Gardens stretched across the open fields. Storehouses overflowed with grain-dried herbs and preserved meat gathered through seasons of steady work. Children who had arrived barely able to walk now carried themselves with quiet confidence. Some trained the younger ones. Some guarded the forest trails. Others cared for the elderly wolves who had traveled from distant lands seeking peace beneath her protection. No one called themselves heroes. They simply did what needed to be done. The woman walked through the village as the first rays of sunlight touched the rooftops. Every face she passed carried warmth instead of fear. Small paws reached for her hand. Young wolves bowed their heads with respect. Older guardians smiled without speaking. She greeted each one by name. She remembered where they had come from. She remembered the night each frightened child had first crossed the sanctuary gates. None of those memories brought sadness anymore. They reminded her how far they had traveled together. The old silver wolf approached from the western trail carrying news from beyond the mountains. His steps remained steady, though age had slowed his body. The packs are gathering. She looked toward him calmly. How many? More than we have ever seen. He paused before continuing. They are not gathering for war. They are gathering because they have heard your story. She remained silent. Stories have become stronger than fear. Before midday, the first visitors arrived. They came without banners, without armies, without demands. An elderly alpha from the northern forests entered the valley beside his family. His fur had turned almost white with age, yet his eyes remained bright. He stopped before the woman and slowly lowered his head. I came because my grandchildren deserve a future better than endless battles. She welcomed him without hesitation. Then another pack arrived, then another. Some had traveled for weeks across frozen rivers and rocky mountains. Some had abandoned lands ruled by cruel leaders. Others carried orphaned pups rescued along their own journeys. The sanctuary opened its gates to all of them. Not one traveler was turned away. The village grew larger with every sunrise. Fresh homes rose beside the older ones. New gardens stretched across empty fields. Voices from many different packs blended together until the valley sounded unlike any place that had ever existed. The children noticed something beautiful. The wolves who had once feared one another now worked beside each other without hesitation. Old rivalries slowly disappeared beneath shared purpose. One evening, the woman stood beside the river watching the sunset paint the water with gold. A young wolf approached quietly. He had been one of the first orphaned pups ever brought to her cottage. Now he stood taller than many seasoned guardians. His shoulders carried strength, his eyes carried kindness. "Mother." She turned toward him with a gentle smile. "You have not called me that in a long time." He smiled. "Because today I finally understand what it means." She waited. "You gave every one of us more than food. You gave us a reason to become better than the world that abandoned us." For a long moment, neither spoke. The river carried away every unnecessary word. She rested her hand upon his shoulder. "You chose that path yourselves. I only opened the door." He looked across the growing village. "Then we will keep it open for everyone who comes after us." As darkness settled over the valley, fires began glowing across the hillsides. Families gathered together beneath the open sky. Children laughed. Guardians shared stories. Music returned to the forest for the first time since the Alpha King disappeared. Far beyond those peaceful mountains, another gathering unfolded. Inside the largest fortress of the Eastern Territory, the remaining Alpha Lords met in secret. None smiled, none celebrated. Reports lay scattered across a massive wooden table. Every report carried the same message. More packs were leaving. Trade routes had begun shifting toward the sanctuary. Hunters refused orders to attack innocent families. Even some warriors questioned the old ways. One Alpha struck the table with his fist. "She is stealing our people without drawing a single blade." Another answered with growing frustration. "Because they choose to follow her." No one could argue. Fear had ruled their kingdoms for generations. Now, loyalty threatened everything they had built. The oldest Alpha slowly rose from his chair. His voice remained calm. "We believed destroying one king would end his legacy. Instead, we created something greater." Silence filled the chamber. No one denied the truth. Back inside the sanctuary, the woman climbed the highest hill before sunrise. Mist drifted across the valley below. Thousands of wolves now called that place home. Children raced along the same paths where frightened orphans had once walked alone. Strong guardians stood watch over borders that no longer felt fragile. The forest itself seemed alive with hope. The old silver wolf joined her once again. "You have built what many believed impossible." She slowly shook her head. "No, they built it. Every child who refused to surrender. Every guardian who chose compassion over hatred. Every wolf who carried one more orphan through the darkness. That is what built this place." The old guardian looked toward the horizon. "What will they call this kingdom?" She smiled softly as the rising sun spread golden light across the valley. "They will decide that. I only wanted them to have a home." Far away beyond the eastern mountains, a lone rider watched the sunrise from a rocky cliff. He carried no banner. His armor bore no mark of any known Alpha. Around his neck hung the ancient symbol of a forgotten bloodline that had vanished long before the Alpha King's reign. His eyes remained fixed upon the distant valley hidden beneath morning mist. A slow smile crossed his face. "At last, the kingdom worthy of awakening has appeared." Then he turned his horse toward the sanctuary. Behind him, the wind carried away the final shadow of the old age. Ahead of him waited a future that neither friend nor enemy had yet imagined. The rider reached the sanctuary just as the morning mist began to lift from the valley. Golden light flowed across the hills and settled over the roofs that had once been nothing more than scattered shelters. Children crossed the open paths carrying baskets of fresh fruit. Young guardians trained beside the river with calm focus. Elder wolves rested beneath ancient trees while watching the next generation grow stronger than the last. The valley no longer felt hidden. It felt alive. Every stone and every tree seemed to carry the memory of those who had refused to surrender. He dismounted without haste. His horse remained still beside him as though it understood this place deserved silence instead of noise. The guardians approached from every direction. Their movements were measured. None rushed forward with anger. None reached for violence before understanding the stranger standing before them. That single choice revealed everything the woman had spent years teaching them. The rider looked across the valley with quiet admiration. I have crossed kingdoms ruled by fear. I have crossed mountains ruled by pride. I have never seen a place ruled by trust. The old silver wolf stepped beside the woman. You have entered under peace. Leave under peace if your heart remains true. The rider lowered his head. My heart carries no claim to this land. The woman stepped forward. Her face held neither suspicion nor pride. She had learned that true strength never hurried to judge. What brings you here? The rider slowly removed the ancient pendant resting beneath his cloak. It carried the forgotten mark of the first guardians. A symbol older than every Alpha throne, older than every kingdom that still stood. My ancestors protected the balance between the packs before ambition divided them. We believed that bloodlines created great rulers. We were wrong. His eyes met hers. We have searched for generations for someone worthy of restoring what was lost. The valley grew quiet. Children stopped their games. The guardians stood motionless. Even the wind seemed to pause among the trees. The rider continued. We followed stories instead of armies. Every road led here. Every traveler spoke of the same woman. They never praised your victories. They praised your kindness. The woman looked around the sanctuary. Children laughed once more beside the gardens. Young wolves repaired homes that did not belong only to them. Families from different packs shared bread at the same table without asking where anyone had been born. This kingdom was never built by me. She spoke softly. It was built by every soul who refused to abandon another. The rider smiled. That answer is exactly why it will endure. Days passed. Word spread beyond every mountain and river. The last independent packs arrived not with weapons, but with gifts. Some carried seeds gathered from distant valleys. Others brought books rescued from forgotten libraries. Craftsmen offered their hands. Healers offered their knowledge. Hunters offered protection. No one demanded rank. No one asked for reward. They simply asked for a place where their children would never be taught to hate. The sanctuary grew into something no map could fully describe. It was no longer a refuge. It had become the heart of a new beginning. One evening, the woman climbed the highest hill where she had once stood alone after the fall of the Alpha King. The same mountains surrounded her. The same moon rose above the forest. Yet everything had changed. Below her, thousands of lights glowed across the valley like stars resting upon the earth. Laughter drifted through the cool night air. Music echoed from homes built by many different hands. The silence that had once carried grief now carried peace. The old silver wolf joined her for what both of them knew would be one final climb together. He looked over the valley with gentle eyes. When I carried the first orphan to your door, I did not know what would happen. She turned toward him. You trusted me before I trusted myself. He smiled. No. I trusted the choice you made when no one was watching. He looked toward the children running below. Power built this kingdom once. He slowly shook his head. Love rebuilt it. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Words were too small for what stood before them. The old guardian finally lowered himself onto the grass. His breathing became slow. His eyes never left the valley. My journey ends in peace. The woman knelt beside him. You gave them all a future, he answered with the faintest smile. You did. As dawn painted the horizon with soft gold, the old silver wolf quietly closed his eyes for the last time. The valley mourned not with despair, but with gratitude. Children placed wildflowers along the forest path where he had first appeared carrying a starving orphan. No monument of stone was raised. Instead, a single young oak was planted beside the trail. The children promised that every orphan who arrived in the future would rest beneath its shade before entering the sanctuary. Years passed like flowing water. The frightened pups who had once fit within her arms became wise leaders. They built new villages without forgetting the first cottage where everything had begun. They welcomed strangers before asking their names. They solved disputes before they became wars. They remembered that every great kingdom could fall if compassion disappeared from its heart. Travelers crossing the territory often asked where the throne of the Alpha Queen stood. The answer always surprised them. There was no throne. The woman preferred a simple wooden bench beneath the ancient oak where children gathered each evening to tell stories and dream about tomorrow. She had learned long ago that the highest seat in any kingdom was not built from gold. It was built inside the hearts of those who chose to follow freely. As the seasons continued their endless dance, the forests flourished once again. The rivers ran clear. The packs hunted together during difficult winters. No orphan ever wandered alone beneath the moon. Whenever a lost pup appeared at the edge of the territory, wolves from every direction still carried it toward the valley. Not because they had been ordered. Because the story had become stronger than law. People no longer remembered the names of the Alpha Lords who had ruled through fear. Time had washed them away like footprints beside a river. But every child knew the story of the woman who accepted, one orphan after another, until an entire kingdom rose around them. They said the greatest Alpha was never the one who conquered the most land. The greatest Alpha was the one who made every abandoned soul believe they belonged again. And beneath the ancient oak where hope first took root, the forest remained alive, with the voices of generations who proved that true power is never inherited. It is earned through every act of courage and every choice to protect those who cannot protect themselves. That became the true legacy of the Alpha King, and the woman who transformed his fallen kingdom into a home that would never fall again.